Hello, beautiful humans. My name's Darius, and you are listening to the Artist Morning Podcast. On today's episode, we dive into a very serious and very sensitive topic. Unless you've been living under a rock, this topic has likely impacted you in some way or another. On May 25th, 2020, an African-American man by the name of George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight by 4 police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His tragic death became the catalyst to hundreds of protests around the world. People of all races and backgrounds were demanding equality and justice for Black people and Black communities. For me, it feels as if something really big and important is unfolding before our eyes. An opportunity for a giant step forward for our species. For many of us, this change couldn't come fast enough. But for others, this shift is actually unwelcome. For both sides of the spectrum and everything in between, there seems to be many fears that are coming to the surface. Me being an optimist, I'd like to believe all the fears and conflicts that have been surfacing are happening for us, not to us. I believe it's happening as an opportunity for us to heal as a planet. On today's episode, Orlando Bowen joins me for an in-depth and heartfelt conversation about racial tensions in the world today. We talk about real practical things we can all do to make a difference. But most of all, Orlando shares his message of hope. Orlando is an internationally renowned keynote speaker. He's spoken on hundreds of stages and to thousands of people over the past 20 years. In this podcast, he shares a very personal experience with police brutality that forever changed the course of his life. From this near tragic encounter with the police, Orlando created an organization called One Voice, One Team, which helps empower youth to utilize their own leadership skills and talents to better themselves and their communities. So far, his organization has impacted over 300,000 youth across North America. I am excited for you guys to hear this podcast. Honestly, I walked away learning so much, and I've already had several really important conversations with my own family and friends based on the insights that Orlando so generously shares in this podcast. That's enough of me talking. Let's jump into the podcast. But before we do, one last thing. If you enjoy the podcast and want to show your appreciation, it's super simple. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share this podcast with whoever you think would be interested in the content. Your support goes a very long way, so thank you for that. And episode 5, here we go, baby. Orlando Bowen, welcome to the Artist Morning Podcast.
Honored to be here, Darius. Appreciate you, man. Thank you for the invitation to join you.
Of course. Before we get started, I'd like to just share gratitude for you and your generosity in being here and sharing your time and your voice with us here. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now. There's protests all over the States, protests all over Canada, all over the world around the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minnesota by police. And there's a heaviness everywhere. I think everyone is feeling its impact. I'm feeling it as well. And I can only imagine what you, your family, your community must be going through. And so you giving us some of your time is really generous. And I just want to share my gratitude to kick things off. And to kick things off, I think what I'd like to do is maybe travel through time and space and get a little context around what young Orlando was like, what it was like where you grew up, what your childhood was like, and maybe just a little bit about influences in those early days.
Love that, man. So I was born in Jamaica. I moved to Toronto when I was 3 years old, grew up inner city, as many new immigrants. When you go to, come to North America, a new country, you don't have, um, well, some new immigrants don't have a lot of resources. And so we're in public housing, and um, parents working incredibly hard. Dad had 3 jobs, mom, full-time student, full-time job. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents and my uncle in my formative years. And, lots of, maybe we didn't have a lot in terms of resources and sometimes in terms of food, but we always had a lot of love,
Mm.
and always had a lot in terms of high expectations. And, they would pour in and do things to help us see that not only did they believe that we had the capacity to achieve, but that we also had the capacity to influence. So my grandmother used to, had this thing: raise the bar, raise the floor, right? Do your absolute best, make a difference, right? And serve, get to the highest level that you can. But as you're doing that, Darius, know that there's someone, a cousin or someone in your community that's watching your example. And as you rise, their possibilities in terms of what they think also rise. So, real sense of responsibility. Funny thing, my dad used to always say, I don't want to see you hanging around those kids that always get in trouble. I want you, make sure you're home, and before the street lights come on, you play, but you be mindful, right? And then one day we were getting ready to go to soccer practice, and there was a kid that I used to always see him um, getting dropped off by a police car,
Hmm.
police cruiser. Um, and I see my dad waving him into the car with us, and I was like, "What the heck?" I thought, but he lived sealed. Years later, when I was an adult, that young man came back and said, your dad was the only person in the community that believed in me. I didn't have a dad in my house. So to have the opportunity to play soccer was way bigger than the sport. And again, there was like a lot of lessons like that modeled by my parents,
Mm.
grandparents, uncle, in terms of possibilities. Right. So, again, we didn't have much materialistically, but we had much. It was rich in love and possibilities. So,
And it
you
seems
know,
like those early days set the foundation for almost your like obsession with this concept of community. And I say obsession
yeah,
in an endearing way.
yeah,
It's really cool to hear that context.
yeah,
And I know um, you started getting into some sports.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how did that go?
Well, my uncle was like a basketball superstar.
Okay.
Went to Central Technical School in downtown Toronto, but we lived close. We lived in North York. So in the early days, I remember walking into a gymnasium with him. There were dozens of people in the gym, and I remember one particular time there were a couple guys. They were shooting around, and as my uncle walked into the gym, they held their ball, put it under their arm, and they looked at him and they said, "How you doing, Henry?" And I was like, "It's like that." I was like, "That's my uncle." Right. And from that point, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be able to, work so hard. I wanted to do something and demonstrate such excellence that my presence would make a difference to other people.
Mm.
So I got involved in basketball, and soccer, and then football. Got a football scholarship to go to Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, home of the Huskies. And
Yes.
I did my thing there. Studied, graduated a couple times, and then started working in information technology. But that when you said obsession with
Community.
like commitment to
Community.
community,
Yeah.
yeah, that I would say that's appropriate,
Mm.
because that's something that's also been modeled. There actually wasn't a lot of talk about it. It's just how our family showed up
It was
uh,
demonstrated.
all the time,
Yeah.
all the time. Even when we didn't have a lot of food to eat, sometimes they would have our neighbors who, now in hindsight, it's like they maybe didn't have anything, that came over and it was share. So, your portions will get a lot smaller. We always had a lot of bread and a lot of rice in the house. But it was just understanding that we're accountable. We're accountable to each other as community.
So you're doing well in sports. You get a
Yeah,
scholarship, make your way down to the States playing college football.
yeah,
Uh, you said you graduate. I love how you said that so quickly. You graduated a couple of times. You got your master's, correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You're in Chicago. You've got this great job
yeah,
and things are looking good. And then all
yeah,
of a sudden you get a phone call by a
yeah,
local legend that everyone
yeah,
in Toronto knows, Mike Pinball
yeah.
Clemens.
Yes,
And
yes,
he's trying to get you to leave all that behind. And so
yes.
tell me about that phone call.
Well, it was uh, it was a winter time, and they were scouting and recruiting for the that 2000 season
Of the
with the
CFL.
Toronto of the Canadian Football League with the Toronto Argonauts. And I what I was doing in Chicago was, in addition to working in IT, I was looking for opportunities to serve and give back and to make a difference. So we were putting together a mentorship program for young people in inner city Chicago neighborhoods.
Okay.
So when he called and he said, and this is something that I'd been like praying about and really thinking about. Like, I just want to serve, because there's so many young people that I felt like they were getting into trouble and making all these decisions that aligned with what they believed to be their capacity,
Mm-hmm.
but they hadn't even scratched the surface in terms of what was possible for them. So I kept thinking, what if we could help them really see like what's possible, really take the blinders off, and then pinball calls. So I'm thinking, what? Wait a minute. So I said, if I make this team, like, will I have a chance to go out in the community and make a difference? And he said, if you make this team, you and I will go out into the community and make a difference. So
Sounds
then,
just
yeah,
like pinball.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't hypothetical. It was like, it's not like, yeah, you can if you want. It's like, we will go make a difference.
And I have no idea what those type of conversations are usually like, but in my head, I imagine it being like, and if I get this pay, and if I get this
Yeah.
perk, and if I, like if I don't have to talk to
Yeah.
these people or I don't have to do, and sometimes maybe
Yeah.
it's I don't want to do community serve,
Right.
working in the
Right.
community. But yours was
Right.
like, no, that is my non-negotiable. That
Yeah,
is
yeah,
amazing.
it's interesting because I never, it was just, like where my heart is. And in talking to Michael Pinball Clemens recently, he mentioned like some things similar to what you said. He said when he would call guys and we're recruiting them, they're like, this has to be my base and this needs to be my bonus and I have to be a starter. And where my non-negotiable was, I have to be able to serve
Yeah.
in order for me to consider it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so what happened?
yeah. So I came back. I made the team. Immediately got involved in service. I was doing all type of things, Darius. I was supply teaching. I was a hall monitor. I was supervising the library. Just trying to do whatever I could to give back and contribute. And in addition to the stuff I was doing in schools, I was working with police services, training them in racial sensitivity. We launched what is now the Stop the Violence campaign, MLSE Stop the Violence campaign. It started off as an anti-bullying program called Huddle Up. So we started that. We partnered with Crime Stoppers. We were doing a lot. Sick kids, homeless kids, refugee families, the whole nine.
And,
Just trying to figure out how I could serve.
and just to be clear, this is in addition to playing professional football.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, yes,
That's
yeah,
that's the job.
yeah.
And then you're doing all these other things in the community.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Okay.
The guys used to sometimes make fun of me because right after practice, they'd be seeing me getting dressed and they're like, man, where you going today? Who you going to try to help today, Bo? And because they knew that's how I was wired.
Mm, okay. And then something happens in 2004.
Yeah,
Could you
yeah.
tell us what
So
happens there?
absolutely. So I'd been, playing. I played 3 seasons in Toronto. Then I played 1 season in Hamilton with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and was going into my second contract with the Ticats, and decided to go out and celebrate with some of my teammates. I got to the place where we were meeting up, and then to drive downtown. I got to that location first, and as I was waiting on them, I had two guys come up to me and ask me if I had any drugs.
Mm.
And long story short, they were both armed with guns, and they grabbed me, accosted me, and they tried to get me down to the ground, and they started to beat me until the skin on my forehead split, my face was busted up. I remember being there and just thinking, I can't believe I'm gonna die like this, right? I remember like one moment in particular where, um, one officer, it turned out that they were two corrupt undercover police officers.
Two
Yeah,
undercover cops, plainclothes
yeah,
cops.
yeah,
Wow.
So it turned out that it was two undercover plainclothes guys, and one was trying to put my hand behind my back, and I kept saying, "Oh my God, I didn't do anything." And as I pulled my arm away, he stumbled, and then when he gathered himself, he put his hand on his pistol and said, "I'm gonna shoot him in the head. I swear to God." In that moment, I was just like, "Man, I'm never gonna see my family again." Sky, my wife, Sky, and I had one son. He was 18 months at the time, and she was pregnant with our second. And I was just like, I guess this is it. And it was just so sobering because I would never have dreamt that, my career would end, much less my life would end like that. And here I was with this very real, though surreal situation where it seemed like my life was actually about to end. They eventually called for backup and then put me in a cruiser and took me to jail. Um, and I kept asking for my phone call. I didn't understand what was going on. I'm like, what? Like, why am I in jail? Could I have my phone call? They wouldn't let me call anyone. And then what happened was that when they realized that I was their spokesperson, I was actually scheduled to be the keynote speaker at an event that brings community and police together. And that was scheduled for less than 2 months after I was assaulted. When they realized that connection, a huge cover up began where they went back to the scene, planted drugs at my car, and then charged me with assault and possession of a controlled substance.
So I'm assuming they were like, wow, we picked the wrong guy to beat up and bully, and the only way we can possibly justify this because he's a spokesperson for the police is we got to tarnish his name beyond belief. It seems like
Yeah,
that was the thinking, I'm assuming.
yeah, yeah. I would say that's fair because they started to, they started to call other officers, and I know this because I worked with so many officers, amazing officers. I worked with them back then, and I still work with some of them today. And they started calling around saying, "Hey, you have some dirt on this Orlando guy because we need something."
Yeah.
Right? So when and some of the guys were like, "What? I mean, the guy that we were just in a school with, the guy that was at our police graduation, that guy." And so um, yeah, it was very surreal in terms of the fact that my assumption was that someone will put their hand up and say, "Hey man, we made a mistake, like something went awry, something went wrong." But instead they did they did everything they could to cover up, which meant charging me with assault and possession of cocaine. So we find ourselves defending or finding lawyers. Even that was a journey to find lawyers that would defend us, um, or defend me. But I say us because our whole family was on this crazy journey.
And
And
why
then,
was that challenging to find a lawyer?
well, lawyers didn't. The first couple lawyers, um, they didn't want to go up against the police.
Mm.
Right? They're like, if it was a individual out there, yeah, but the police, like, they're so big, and they don't like for the boat to be rocked or feathers to be ruffled. So, um, you know, one lawyer even tried to get me to plead guilty to a lesser charge to make it easier.
Mm.
And I was, so it was a crazy journey to get to find a lawyer that would take the case. And then when we did, we were like, okay, cool. They understand who we are. And even after that vibe and that energy, they still said, well, we hope we get a good judge. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, because it's not about what happened, it's what's believed to have happened, right? So, and I just kept thinking the whole time, there must be a lot of innocent people in jail, man, because we had resources that we could access in order to, um, to defend ourselves, to hire a lawyer, right? But if we didn't, and we had to depend on, like the legal aid or a public defender type of scenario,
You just be in
you just
jail.
get what you get,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, oh shoot, I'm not really getting paid, what I would normally be getting paid. I'm not gonna really like fight hard, which has been the experience of a number of folks with whom we've spoken. Um, so like even that whole situation, like we were blessed to be able to have resources to get a lawyer that would be willing to battle on our behalf. And then as we were going through that whole journey in court, and nearing the verdict, actually, the arresting officer in my case was himself arrested for trafficking cocaine. They found
Hold up. So say that part again. It's really important.
Yeah. So as we were going through the case and getting near to the verdict, the arresting officer in my case was himself arrested for trafficking cocaine. Yeah. So so then that shifted things for the crown, from the crown attorney's perspective. And they called and they're like, well, they didn't know that we knew about the charges because it wasn't public. It wasn't made public, but we knew because we had contacts in the media who were banned from speaking about it. So the crown attorney calls and she's in a very jovial, friendly, I've got your back kind of tone,
Yeah.
right? Which we hadn't heard ever.
Yeah.
She says, hey, Orlando, you do such amazing work in the community. Everyone knows that. I mean, we don't think it's fair for you to, have your name dragged through the mud, which the courts can sometimes do that. Why don't you just let us drop the charges and we could all just go home and be happy? And I was like, wow, really? That's how this works? I said, absolutely not. I said, I'd rather be wrongfully convicted versus striking a deal on that premise. And her response was, there was a significant shift in her tone and her voice. And she said, fine, buddy, this was your chance. You're going down. And she hung up the phone. And, the next call we got was to show up in court because the other option they had was to petition the judge.
And so hold on. So what was your rationale? She's saying we're going to throw this whole thing out.
Yeah.
And you said no. Right. I just want to be clear on why.
Yeah, I didn't want there to be any misconceptions around what was happening in my case. I was like, I don't care what's happening in any other case. We told you that the officers were shady from as soon as this trial started, and they were lying, and they were conflicting on major things. We already told you, and you had your opportunity to drop it after the officers began their testimony, and you chose not to. So now we're going to run the race. I'd rather be wrongfully convicted versus allowing you to drop the case on that basis, on the basis of the fact that he did something somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. I want a judgment and a ruling on the merits of this case.
And I just want to say, like, knowing what happens with your story is one thing, but at that point, you had no reason to believe anyone is interested in justice after everything you've seen, but yet you had this faith that you're like, I'm going to go down this path.
Yeah.
Even though I've seen the levels of corruption and what they're willing to do to save their butts.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this because I want there to be no doubt that I had nothing to do with that.
Yep.
That is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I remember our lawyer saying, are you sure? Like I've never had this scenario before.
Yeah.
Because they know that the longer they drag it out, it's the more money that we have to pay, the more prep, the more stress, the more like the list goes on and on, right? So they wanted to dangle the carrot of all you have to do is give us the green light and we'll just make this go away. But at that time, at that point, for me, it wasn't about anything going away from me.
Mm-hmm.
It was about justice and being clear and unequivocal in a vindication that I believed, I trusted, I had faith that I would be vindicated because I was innocent, and everyone knew. The officers knew, their supervisors knew, the crown knew, everyone knew that I was innocent, right? But still they decided to proceed, and I couldn't believe it. I honestly I couldn't believe it was a real shocking introduction to how the system can or perhaps is designed to work.
Mm-hmm. And so now you're in court.
Yeah, so they invite us to court. And they asked the judge to let them drop the charge. The judge says no. He said, and actually, I've actually made my decision earlier than I had planned. I prepared my judgment for this day, and I find Mr. Bowen not guilty on all counts, and these are the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I was acquitted on that day, and then we filed a civil lawsuit that settled out of court years later. All in all, it took about 5.5 years.
And what happened to that police officer?
The officer that was charged, he was convicted and sentenced to go to jail for 5 years, 8 months, actually. And I remember, it was a journey, man. I'm telling you, Darius, because even when, like, when the judge delivered his ruling, I felt a sense of relief. And then people were like, "Congratulations, you won, you won." And I was like, "Well, what did we win?" Right? Because we shouldn't have been here in the first place.
Yeah.
And everybody, like he knows it and he knows it and she knows, like we shouldn't even have been here in the first place. So I felt like there was work to be done in just helping, people see people, like as human beings and treat them accordingly versus doing what they could to just uphold or maintain a system, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So when the officer was sentenced to prison and people wanted to celebrate, I said no, it's not about that. And he's a father just like I am. And we've worked with young people who are dealing with the pain of a parent being gone for whatever reason, death or prison or what have you. So I wasn't cool with that at all.
And instantly you weren't cool with that, or it took a little time to get not cool with that?
No, I wasn't cool with it at all.
Right away.
Right away.
Yeah.
He's going to prison, which there's consequences now, right? There are consequences. So, yes, consequences are being served. That's separate and apart from me, right? I had released him of any like real connection to me. Whatever happened, happened. I wasn't hoping that he goes to prison. I just wanted the truth to come out in our case.
Yeah.
And whatever seeds that he'd sow, I mean, he has to live with those consequences, not me.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I was just like, I have work to do. Even the fact that my life didn't end that night was enough of a gift and a blessing for me to understand that my life has purpose, and I've got to find that purpose and step into that purpose
Mm-hmm.
and serve.
And I want to talk about what you were able to create from that pivotal moment in your life in just a second, because it's important and it's inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And before I do that, I'm curious, because every time I talk to you, that energy of hope is all over you, and I walk away more hopeful.
Mm.
And this story that has many moments of, it seems, hopelessness,
Mm-hmm.
yet you come back with hope.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look in the world and the conversations I've been having the last few days and the last 2 weeks, there's a lot of people feeling the heaviness, and a lot of
Yeah.
people at that place of like helplessness, hopelessness.
Right.
And I'm curious, what would you say to them? Like, how did you find hope in this chaotic situation?
Yeah.
And how can they do the same?
Yeah. So for me, part of my hope comes from my faith and knowing that there will be challenges, but we'll get through them. And when we get through them, it's not gonna, it may not be like, woohoo, we got through. It's so exciting, right? It may not look like that.
Yeah.
It may look very different, but like life is it's a roller coaster, man. There's ups and there's downs, and it's not you, right? It's not you. It's just life. That's just how life is, right? And there's a quote that says that adversity reveals character, prosperity conceals it. It's easy to be joyful and find joy when all is well. When there are challenges, you got to look hard sometimes, right? You have to look deep. Sometimes you got to look inside. Sometimes you have to see it in your friends and colleagues. Sometimes you have to work to find that thing,
Hmm.
right? That will allow you to stay hopeful and to know that we will get through it, right? So folks who are feeling like they're challenged, their hope is challenged, know that we will get through this. It's painful. I know. I feel it. It's so painful. We've lost folks close to us, right? And but in all of that, we still have a choice in terms of how we show up, how we engage,
Yeah.
and what we look for in terms of the positives and the things to be grateful for. The people. Listen, I could have been dead. I get to hug my wife and kids and
Hmm.
let them know that I love them, and I get to hang out with amazing people like you, Darius, and others who have your heart to make a difference. Those are gifts. I don't care what's going on around me. There are a lot of people on this planet that don't have that,
Yeah.
right? And I have a roof over my head, right? So yeah. So anyhow,
I'm seeing and I'm hearing a practiced uh ritual and routine around gratitude.
yeah,
Seems like you have a set to, yes, there are really challenging parts,
yeah,
and I'm gonna see that, and I'm gonna feel that, and I'm gonna have empathy for that,
yeah,
but also look at all the good things here. Maybe that gives you energy. So my question would be, what other tactical, practical things do you have supporting you to keep your cup of hope full?
yeah. Yeah. So like being mindful, right? And some people prayer, meditation, standard practice for me, reflecting every night, talking about what we're grateful for, reflecting on what's transpired in the day and teasing out, even within the challenges, that there's hope in those challenges. There are lessons in the challenges, right? And sometimes, a lot of the times, the lessons aren't readily apparent for us, right? Sometimes it's only as we get through it, Darius, and we look back, we're like, hey, that's why that happened.
Mm.
That and something that you said, like when we're in Los Angeles, and I'm sitting on a deck somewhere, and it's like, well, wait a minute, Darius said the same thing. So you don't know when the seeds are going to be planted, right? And you don't know when those seeds are going to come to fruition, when you're going to reap those seeds, right? But if you stay open, eyes open, ears open, you always give yourself a chance to learn and to grow as you journey through these times, man.
Mhm.
So what you look if you're all you're looking for are the challenges, guess what you're gonna find? Challenges.
Challenges, yeah.
But if you look for lessons and opportunities to connect with people, which I feel like right now, with everything that's going on, like people may not understand what it's like to be in my skin, but they could understand what pain feels like. They could understand what uncertainty feels like. They could understand what disruption feels like. And if we needed this to be able to connect deeper with each other, then so be it. Then let's embrace this,
Mhm.
right? And know that if we treat each other as human beings and see each other as people, then we could journey through this thing together and be better because we journey together.
Yeah. So, I'm seeing I'm seeing people directly that are feeling the heaviness and the hopelessness,
Yeah,
and on the media, when I turn on the news, when I pull up my social media feed, I'm seeing a different heaviness.
Hmm.
I'm seeing anger, I'm seeing violence, I'm seeing destruction. And I want to
Yeah.
say there's a lot of non-violent protests happening,
Right.
right? But the
Yeah.
media is set up to focus on the violence because it just gets more
Right.
views.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is violence and there is,
Right.
destruction.
Yes.
If you were able to, and I know you've worked with thousands and thousands of youth, if you were
Yeah.
able to have a handful of these youth in a room who are not so much on the hopeless side, they're on the violent, destructive side,
Yeah.
like what practical thing would you tell them to get through to them?
Yeah. Well, first I seek understanding, right? First I seek understanding because just as what happened in Minneapolis in terms of the murder of George Floyd, just as that didn't happen in that moment. You understand? The occurrence, the act, the behavior
Yeah.
manifested in that moment, but that's not where it began. That's not where it was nurtured. That's not where it was built. Right. So when I see acts, my first question is, where's that coming from? Why is that the act? Why is that the action that you've decided to take or not take?
Yeah.
Right. So my first thing would be to seek to understand where that's coming from. Is it coming from a place of pain? Is it coming from the thought that no matter what I do, I have a certain destiny, jail or prison? Is it coming from, this is how this is what I've seen around me?
Mhm.
Or is it coming from, hey, it's an opportunity? So to seek understanding, right, first, right? And then, my perspective on it is to understand the message and the significance of the time that we're in and the ability to be really deliberate with our actions so that the message doesn't get lost, right? Because when you turn on the media and you see the violence and you see rioting or you see looting or burning of things, people are like, oh, it's not even about the gentleman who was killed. It's that people are just being opportunists. They're just greedy. So you mentioned it. Be mindful of what you take in from the media because it's not always what it seems.
Mhm.
First of all, because it's some of the folks that I've seen doing some of the rioting and looting aren't some of the folks that the media is reporting that they are. And then in addition to that, if we can do what we can to make sure that the narrative stays on the opportunity for us to get better, right? As a collective, as a community, as a country, as a world, let's stay focused on that.
Mhm.
Let's not be distracted and understand that people are going to throw distractions in it, but let's stay focused on the opportunity here for us to grow through this and to be better and to rewrite history because of the actions that we take today.
Do you think there is a place for violent protest?
I I never I can't see I would never encourage violence. Um can I understand somebody getting to a place where they feel like they have no other uh way for their voice to be heard? I could understand that. Would I support it? No, I wouldn't support it, but I can understand someone getting to that space.
Yeah.
And because we've seen, like, if history is any indication, we've seen, like peaceful protests and folks get attacked, right? We see it. So some people are gonna say, well, that's not gonna work, right? And it's only like you got to get people's attention, you got to destroy things, and
Yeah.
and then they'll listen, and maybe there's truth to that. um yeah, so I don't know if there's a place, but I can understand someone's frustration getting to the point where they feel like that's the only option.
Mhm. Yeah. It's a tough question. It's a really tough
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Um,
Well, I just to add to that too, because my Sky was asking me, my wife Sky was asking me the other day about that. We're having a conversation, and it's like, well, would you step in if you were marching peacefully, and you see someone about to smash a window? Would you step in?
yeah.
And well, she was like, well, I don't know if they've got a mental health condition. I don't know if they're armed.
Yeah.
I would just stay focused on what my responsibility is in the moment. And I hear that, and I agree to a certain extent. I would have to look into their eyes, though, right? I would need to, I don't see myself not saying anything, and that's just a choice. And
Yeah.
she's petite and very cute and
Yeah.
amazing. So there's that as a factor as well.
Yeah.
But again, staying focused on the message, I think is really important right now.
I've seen probably so many videos of rioting and looting, and the ones I like to focus on are the ones where I witness in those videos black women and men making a line in front of like a Best Buy and just
Right,
telling people stop.
right,
And in that particular video, I didn't see any black people throwing things,
right,
but I saw black people making a line saying this is not the way, and it was
right,
younger white men that were doing the looting. So it's just
right,
like,
right.
like it's a very complicated
Yeah,
thing. I've been researching, Director X has been putting all these posts up about like, where did these bricks come from?
right, right. I remember that.
Right? Like,
I remember seeing.
where are they coming from? There's no construction, and then there's documented, photos of people, construction people coming, escorted by police, leaving the bricks. And he also put,
I did. Wow,
yeah, he
that's deep.
also put a post up saying it was interesting, saying do what the people in Hong Kong did when the same. It's an actual tactic apparently. You bring bricks, you let the people destroy their own communities, then the business owners in that community and the leaders in that community say we got to stop this. It's causing too much damage to us. That's a
Right.
strategy. And in Hong Kong, what they ended up doing with the bricks is they would make little sculptures with the bricks and put them all over the road. And that would prevent cops. And, I'm like, smart, very
That's
smart.
deep,
Yeah.
man. That's deep.
Um, so it's a complicated, complex
Yeah.
situation. And you don't know what you do. I don't know what I would do
Right.
if someone was throwing that brick. And I feel you in that, like, there's empathy for someone
Yeah.
getting to that place where they
Yeah.
feel like there's no one and nothing looking out for them, and
Right.
there's no repercussions to like destruction. And I can
Yeah.
feel that place as well.
Hmm.
Um, so I want to slightly pivot, but actually
Yeah. No
a
worries.
good segue into this feeling conversation. Uh,
Hmm.
I was listening to a podcast with you, and I heard you tell a story about a teacher. You came and I think you
Hmm.
gave a talk at a school,
Yeah.
and a teacher heard your talk and was so emotionally impacted by it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it triggered some guilt and some shame.
Yeah.
And that teacher made a comment to the principal saying, I don't think you should invite Orlando back for future talks because I don't feel good.
Right.
And I'm wondering what you think the role of actually feeling the emotions, feeling the pain, feeling the shame, feeling the fear, helplessness, whatever it might be, is to the healing process.
Hmm. For me or for others,
I,
because
I think
yeah,
particularly for white people.
yeah. And I was on a call earlier with a friend of mine who was wrestling with some of that, feelings of guilt or what have you. So here's, what I feel about that is, um, certain things, um, certain things have brought us to this point where people are willing to look introspectively at their role, at their actions or lack of actions in terms of things that may have led people to feel, like they don't belong, or to feel, overt racism, right? But so up until this point, there was, I believe, for the majority, there wasn't that consciousness of the impact of their actions, right? So for me, like when I think about people feeling something, being stirred emotionally, I think that's good depending on what you do with that.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's so important to feel what you feel and then name what you feel, right? And then decide to take action. Because don't just stay stuck in that, right? Even like when people go through challenging circumstances, don't stay stuck and on repeat with respect to the circumstance that elicited that emotion, but learn from that and say, how can I use this emotion, this feeling of guilt or what have you, to make it better for those whose spaces I share, or for the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it reminds me of like if you had a wound in your arm and you just refusing to acknowledge it and you don't
Yeah.
want to feel it, you put a band-aid on it so it's kind of like numb a little bit
Right.
and you just look away. That thing might get infected and
Yeah.
might create havoc throughout
Yeah.
other places. And
Yeah.
it's like step one is awareness. Like,
Right.
damn, this is a wound. I did
Yeah.
something to, like something happened here and I got
Yeah.
to feel it before I can heal it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
100%.
think people, yeah, it's like intellectually, they're like, that is horrible. That's
Yeah.
terrible,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
like, what
Right.
role did I
Whoa.
play?
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like,
Whoa.
oh
Yeah.
man, that's and this is the victim stance for me. And I can't
Right.
keep thinking about this myself. And then I'm like, what
Right.
role did I play? You
Right.
know? And I love what you said. What can I do?
Right.
It's not wallow in this like I'm terrible, I should feel guilty.
Yeah.
It's like I feel guilty, I did something terrible, I could have done better, and
Yeah.
now I have power, I have breath, I am alive.
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that in the Western hemisphere, like a lot of the time when we feel pain, we get something that
Numbs it.
numbs it,
Yeah.
right? Done. Deal with it. Oh, this hurting you, take something, it goes away.
Yeah.
Right. And that's we're used to, we feel it and we took something, it's gone. But now when we're talking about the internal, right, when we're talking about the reflection is causing us to look introspectively in a way that could see how we were contributors, or actors or agents of harm, that pain doesn't go away so quickly.
No.
You can't just make it go away, right? So that's a challenge, because that in and of itself is a deviation from what our norm is when we're dealing with pain and challenges.
That's a
But I
great
think it's
analogy. I
good.
feel like so many people, myself included, a little while back is like, give me the antibiotic. Give me the pill.
Hmm.
You're the pro. Give me the pill. I will do the easy task of swallowing the pill and
Hmm.
then I'll be good.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And I can empathize with that too. It's like you're the
Right.
professional, you're the doctor, you are
Yeah.
a black man. You tell me.
Yeah.
You tell
Right.
me,
Right.
I'll
Right.
do
Right.
it and then I'll be good. And I'll be
And
like,
you'll be good.
right?
Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
100%. Sometimes you got to feel it to be able to understand what it is,
yeah.
and then name it. And then with the same hands, or that may have been, complicit, willingly or unwillingly,
Yeah.
knowingly or unknowingly, or consciously or subconsciously. Now you can consciously, with those same hands, move things towards
Yes.
possibilities.
Yes, exactly. Um your brilliant, inspiring wife Sky. I heard you guys do an Instagram live on Monday that like is still replaying in my head and
Mm,
is the catalyst for you being here as well. Uh she made a distinction I had never heard before between
mhm.
ally and co-conspirator.
Yeah,
Can you explain that, please?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I the doctor's name evades me right now, but when Sky talks about it, she talks about, there's a story actually, in the doctor's book, that talks about Dylan Hook, the shooting that happened
Yeah.
uh, in the South.
Is that
in
the
the
one in
U.S.
the church or the
In the church,
yeah,
yeah, in
yeah.
the church, where nine people were murdered, and so there was a decision made where a black lady was going to. They wanted to take down the Confederate flag because of what it meant and because of Dylan Roof's connection to it. Black lady was going to do it. They gathered the resources for her bail money and the whole 9 yards, and they got ready and they got the signal. It was time to go, and she started to. They taught her how to climb the flagpole, and she was climbing the flagpole. And as she was nearing it, police were on the way. Um, there's a white gentleman who was with her,
Yeah.
and as the police came and they were trying to get her down, and she wasn't going to come down, they decided that they were going to tase the pole, right, which would result in her
Falling.
falling.
Yeah.
Yeah. The white gentleman put his hand on the pole
Wow.
and stood there, knowing that they wouldn't tase it because his hand was on the pole. That is a co-conspirator, right? An ally would have been someone that would be say, hey, don't do it. Don't. Oh, I tried, man. I told them, I told them not to do it. But co-conspirator will actually, put themselves out there
In
and be
harm's
willing
way.
to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? In order to protect what we know is the right thing, or in order to protect someone else.
Yeah. That's powerful. I remember Sky sharing a story, and maybe I don't know if this is an example of co-conspirator too, around someone resigning from a seat in a
Mm,
board,
yeah,
saying that there's too many white men or women here already, and we need it to be representative of the community we serve. And I'm gonna again put myself in a disadvantage to create justice.
right.
And I think it's a controversial concept, right?
Yeah,
Because it's like,
yeah,
inherently we're like, why would I harm myself
right,
to protect someone else? And I think the only
right,
way you could possibly get there is if you believe in community.
right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You,
Yeah. So I think that task was they were designing programming that was supposed to center around anti-black racism, and they're saying, well, we need some people at the table that have the lived experience
yeah.
versus us just reading about it, right? So, and one of the folks at the table said, well, if it means that I have to leave so that somebody else could take this seat,
Yeah.
then that's what I have to do. For the work, for the outcome that we're talking about to happen, we need to have representation.
Yeah.
If that means I gotta go.
Again, putting the work, the community,
Yes,
the bigger picture before yourself.
absolutely.
Yeah. So a question I've been wrestling with is there a different role brown or non-white people, I'm of Middle Eastern descent, um, can play in this collective healing process? And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is if I use the example of a big family
Yeah.
and I see my black brothers and sisters and my white brothers and sisters, and there's a deep tension between them,
Mhm. Mhm.
a deep resentment, a deep, and for things that happened in the past and things that are still happening today.
Mhm.
And me as something different than those two things, but
Yeah.
having the ability to empathize with both in certain degrees,
Yeah.
is there some different role I can play to help facilitate an environment of healing? And I
Yeah.
want to say something really important here. There, I'm not saying there are no examples of anti-black racism from non-white people and brown people. That's for
Right.
sure exists.
Right.
But I
Right.
imagine it feels different when there's not like centuries of history there.
Yeah.
So there's less energy and heat there, and it's like I'm trying to figure out, like, is there something I can do to and again, it's not my job to heal anyone.
Right,
It's
right,
just,
right.
I feel like my job to create an environment that nurtures more love, respect, and healing.
Yeah, yeah. So my thought around that is what the how you articulated at the end around nurturing respect and healing and creating and fostering a safe space where if you're black, if you're white, if you're brown, and any shade in between, you know that you have a voice that matters. You know that your presence matters.
Yeah.
So you being able to navigate and understand and get a pulse on or a vibe on where the tension may be coming from, right? Whether that's a personal experience that this person may have had, maybe it's where this person grew up, right? That they didn't interact with folks that didn't look like them. You having the ability to see that, whether you're brown or black or white or anything in between, I think it's a responsibility, right? I think we have to be looking at ways that we can be catalysts to move things forward to what's possible,
Mm.
right? Because what the way it exists is short, right? We're short in terms of humanity and the suppression of our human the humanity within all of us, right? So anything that we could do to be a catalyst to cultivating those types of spaces, I personally feel is an obligation for us to look for ways to do that.
Yeah. And is there any different way that non-white people could come to the center, or is it just like it's all contextual, I guess?
Yeah, I think it starts with building relationships. For me, it's all about relationships,
Yeah.
right? If the interactions are transactional, then like who cares? It doesn't really matter,
Mm.
right? Because it's a transactional. If the vibe is that it's transactional, then I'm not going to have a lot in high expectations of being able to move beyond that per se,
Yeah.
unless I'm working as a catalyst towards moving it beyond the transactional interaction or transactional experience.
Yeah.
So if you get to know the persons involved, then the way that you curate those spaces shifts, because it's no longer, you're not coming at them like, oh, you need to be, or why don't you, or let me explain on behalf. No, it's like, hey man, listen, I know, I get it, I understand where you could, let's go out and eat some whatever kind of food.
Yeah.
Let me bring something to this space where that values your perspective and values and honors your perspective,
Yeah.
so that we can collectively have more than a transactional interaction.
That's powerful. What I'm getting from that is to go back to that like antibiotic pill example.
Yeah,
It's in my experience, the only way you actually heal is by people feeling safe. And the only
yeah,
one key way to feel safe is to know that it's not transactional. You're not
right,
like, I need to get this outcome in this time period or
right,
I'm
right,
out. I'm out, right?
yeah,
Like if the pill
yeah,
doesn't work in 10 days, forget it. I'm
yeah,
out. Where it's like, no, I'm committed. I'm
yeah,
here. I'm going to build a relationship with you longer term.
yeah,
And then there's like a safety, right? It's like,
yeah,
okay, I get it. This isn't transactional. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
Um, and my last thing I want to talk about, I could talk to you for so long because you're a wealth of hope and knowledge. Is what did you create in the middle of that, from that chaos?
Yeah,
Tell us about the organization you created and the work you do, um, sharing your story around the world.
yeah. So one thing is I speak corporately around bringing people together, equipping people to be game changers, and game changers show up in ways that shift perspective and possibilities and paths for other people by virtue of how they show up. And in that same vein, a real passion of mine is youth leadership. So we started a youth leadership charity called One Voice, One Team.
One team.
Yeah, One Voice, One Team Youth Leadership Organization. And it's all about helping young people see people as people, and show up in ways where they could celebrate, where they could use their own gifts, talents, and life lived experiences to pour hope and positivity into other people's lives. And they grow, they transform in the process. So we work with young people ages 7 to 13, well, actually 7 to 18, but we have a summer camp for 7 to 13-year-olds that we're really focusing on this notion of I see you and I'm willing to stand for you. That we're putting out into the ether, because the more young people we could get to understand their worth, their value, their talents, their gifts,
Yeah.
that are willing to see people and stand for them, the less we will have to deal. We want to get to a place where we don't have to deal with what we've been dealing with lately, with people suppressing their humanity. And if we focus on the youth coming up now, the goal is that we'll get to that peaceful, more harmonious reality as we journey forward.
Mm-hmm. I get it now after this podcast. What you're doing with your incredible organization, One Voice, One Team, is you are planting the seed of community, the way your grandma, your grandfather, and your family did for you
Yeah.
all those years back. Because I see that seed that was planted by them, even though maybe you didn't have all the things, it's so strong. It's grown. That plant is a mighty oak tree in you. And I see you sprinkling it all over the place and trying to, instill that same value of hope and community in the youth. And you're changing the world by doing that, man. You should know that if you don't know that, but I am so honored to know you and so grateful for this time you've given us. You got 2 websites, right? The one's for the speaking.
Yeah.
We'll put links all over the place, but just in case someone's just listening, you want to share
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. OrlandoBowen.com.
Yeah.
For the corporate work.
Book this man for your talk. Book him. He's full of energy. He'll light up the room and it will make an impact. And if they're interested in supporting or getting more information about the organization.
Yeah. One Voice, One Team, all spelled out. ONE Voice, ONE Team.org.
Amazing.
Yeah. Come on, join the movement, man. Do what you can to help bring hope and possibility and positivity to the current and upcoming generations.
I don't know what's more important than setting the youth up for success. Yeah. Thank you, Orlando. Thank you so much for the work you do, for the energy you bring to every encounter I've ever had with you. And I'm sure it's not just me. This has been really special and I can't wait for us to do something cool together and collaborate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Appreciate you, Darius. Keep up the amazing work, man. Thank you.
Cool. All right. That's the episode, guys. We'll see you next week. Peace.